I'm sure you've all at least started to open your gifts by now, but how about one more? So here's a Christmas bonus for you. An interview I had with parapsychologist Dylan Jones earlier this year. So I hope you enjoy, and I'll take the conversation over to Mr. Jones. I have some really supportive friends and family, and when I told them who I was interviewing and that you're a parapsychologist, they said, "Oh, that's so great, that's so exciting. What's a parapsychologist?" So why don't you tell us exactly what being a parapsychologist means?
The best way of describing what a parapsychologist does is the academic study of three core areas. So they look at extrasensory perception, psychokinesis, but also what we use terms the survival of bodily death. A parapsychologist will usually focus on one of those three areas. My primary interest is the latter, the survival of bodily death, and whether or not things like apparitions, hauntings, or poltergeist phenomena are some form of activity that you can actually study and measure. My area of expertise falls within the more sort of the anthropological study of modern paranormal groups, the paranormal investigators themselves, their behaviour, why they do what they do, and what influences the way that they behave in particular. So it's very much a multidisciplinary field. Parapsychologist, often people think you're a paranormal psychologist, which is incorrect, because para means outside of. And the problem is that parapsychologists are drawn from various disciplines, physics, obviously psychology, sociology, anthropology, and you're all coming together with your various backgrounds and trying to work to understand what people have actually experienced. It's not the greatest of terms, but it's the one that we've got at the moment.
I've been in a few allegedly haunted places and spoken to people who have been through something they can't explain. Whether they're excited to have had the experience or terrified, I've found that these experiences become incredibly emotionally charged, and people become very protective of that location and the experience.
Well, I think what a lot of people forget is that that's what this is all about. It's the human experience. TV shows have become focus for the equipment, being in the dark, calling out, all these kinds of behaviours, and they're forgetting that the crucial part is that you need a human being to have had an experience first, and our job is to try and assess what the witness has experienced, not to run around in the dark with bits of equipment shouting at ghosts to show themselves.
Yeah, as fun as Ghost Adventures was as a kid, I was disenchanted by most ghost shows pretty quickly. It felt like I was just watching someone scream into the void, as opposed to really digging into the witness's experiences, the history of the location, or even really finding anything.
Ghost hunters, they don't like to be called ghost hunters, they prefer paranormal investigators. It's become very performative, very ritualistic, and it's more about the performance. And I don't think they realise that they're actually engaged in a performance, but they're all very much formulaic. So when you watch one group, it's pretty similar. It's like, for me, it's like being in the middle of a live-action TV show rather than an investigation, because, I was a police officer for 18 years. I know how to investigate an occurrence, how to gather evidence and present it in an acceptable way. And there are very few paranormal research groups that actually do it with that form of methodology.
Social media has kind of created a monster that can't be sated. Video after video is churned out. Undoubtedly, a good number of them are fake, but who knows how many are real, and it's impossible to pin them down. And now thousands of smaller ghost hunting teams rally around these sort of key pieces of evidence. That's all fine and good, but I think that ghost hunting shows have been around for so long now that these teams struggle to separate investigation from entertainment. Almost all of these teams are using tools that they don't really understand how they work. This is a REM pod. This is an EMF reader. This is what it does. Yeah, but do you understand how it does that? What those measurements mean? I can't tell if people are relying on these tools because it makes investigating the paranormal feel more scientific, that it helps add legitimacy. Or are people afraid of not finding something? Since ghost hunting has become so entangled with entertainment, are people scared of not finding evidence during an investigation? Instead of considering that if they don't collect evidence all of the time, that maybe it would add legitimacy for when they do find something compelling.
Yeah, and I think that genuine research means hard work. Investigator, and she was using an EMF meter, K2 meter, a reputably haunted location. And it was going off every so often, the lights, and it would be, "Oh, thank you, Spirit," when she asked a question. Some questions never elicited a response in the machine. Other times it did, and whenever it did, it was, "Oh, thank you, Spirit." So I asked her to explain how this piece of kit works. Oh, it measures EMF. Okay, well, does it measure amplitude or frequency, this particular device? And her face went blank. And I was like, well, have you thought about reading any books on, sort of basic physics that you would do in high school? Oh, I don't understand physics. So it's like, if you were a nurse or a doctor and you were assessing a patient for something, be it something as straightforward as, say, temperature, you'd expect that that person was trained in how to use the device, but also have an understanding of how to interpret the information, the data that has been given back. Because you'd be pretty concerned if somebody just strolled onto the ward with a white coat and a stethoscope around their neck and was calling themselves a doctor. Because it's interesting, when you speak to people, and I've been asking them, well, you're using X piece of kit, why do you use that piece of kit? What prompted you to use it? And it's more that, well, I know it needs to be used because I know that other people use it. It's like you said about going back to the fishing analogy, that if you wanted to go fishing, well, you kind of know you need a rod, you need a reel, you need some bait. You just know. And, the paranormal research has become sort of ingrained now in our culture that people sort of know what they need. Sometimes they've seen it on TV, sometimes they've seen another investigator using it. But you're right, they rely on that little bit of knowledge, and then it's, oh, well, we'll look on Google. Can you imagine if you went to the doctors and the doctor said, let me just check Google? It's become so accessible and easy to go on an investigation now that anybody can literally do it. I think there's lots of things going on during an investigation, and that will definitely be one of the things. I think there's a differentiation because a lot of them, they have their ghost hunting investigations, they have their events, which they term investigations, but obviously to feel that if they have guests paying, they have to feel that they've given them something and can engage with and take from it, be that things have lit up, things have gone beep, there's been something unusual. But they don't really understand or look to rationalise what other things could be going on in those situations. For example, the REM pod, that can be set off by simple things like walkie-talkies up to 80 feet away. And there's no way that they can possibly confirm or deny that that hasn't happened. So they tend to go with the paranormal explanation because of confirmation bias or because that's what's needed in the situation.
That doesn't really make for a good investigation if you feel the proverbial breathing down your neck, pressuring you to see or hear something by the end of the night.
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of these investigators are driven, not always, but a lot of them are by a personal experience earlier on in their life. I mean, I had one when I was 7, and it's something that does spur you on. One of the other things that spurs people on is that media influence. It's very important that I emphasise to people who research, we need people researching. Because somebody's had this experience, which they believe is paranormal, it deserves study. And you should be open to the possibility that, as equally as it could be something perfectly normal, you must never rule out the fact that it could be a paranormal occurrence. You don't go in with that confirmation bias that there's no such thing as a paranormal, which some people, some academics have been very guilty of in the past.
But with the entertainment perspective, it feels like the investigation part has diminished due to the strain of the audience. I think people need to decide if what they're doing is primarily entertainment or primarily investigation. It can be one or the other, or even both. But to successfully do any of those things, I think you need to be honest about what you're trying to accomplish.
It's the agenda of the production companies as well. And unfortunately, a lot of these people who engage in the shows as participants, they have to sign non-disclosure agreements, and that ties them up from being able to speak freely about what happens on set. So a lot of the people I've spoken to who have worked in that environment, they've told me what really went on, but they can't go on record because of what they've signed. And there is currently a program in production that I'm aware of where the investigators have been told, can we just spice it up? And it's like, it's just profoundly immoral. There was also an occasion where it was said in a public domain, so I've got no problem with bringing that to the fore, where one of the producers of a production company wanted the people who were on screen to produce something very Ghostbusters. They wanted a ghost trap. Now, that is in an episode of the Tennessee Wraith Chasers where they built a ghost trap. But it's the media production companies driving that agenda forward for their own reasons and then putting it upon the people who are on screen to feel that they need to go ahead with that. And to me, that just puts them in a predicament where they feel that they can't stand up and say, that's not appropriate. Or are they selling their souls for the sake of fame and fortune?
Unfortunately, I don't think any production company is seeing these shows as anything more than a means to an end, almost viewing it as a horror show production, not anything legitimate or scientific. So who cares if the evidence is real? It was entertaining, wasn't it? But how does being an entertainment production warp the beliefs that the public has about investigating the paranormal?
There's a really good book by a researcher from North Carolina, D.W. Pasolka, and she was a consultant on the first Conjuring movie. She's talking about how the movie version trumps the historical reality to things. I mean, she's talking about the first Conjuring movie. For me, it's The Conjuring 2, which really emphasises that point about how much people think the case happened in a very specific way, where Ed and Lorraine Warren go to Enfield in 1977 and they are the saviours of the family. Well, the reality is the case lasted 14 months and their involvement was 10 minutes. But what you see on screen when you see the movie, people are genuinely taken aback when I explain to them, look, if you've seen this film, well, this is what really happened. And they're genuinely dumbfounded by this.
The Warrens. The Amityville case in particular rubs me the wrong way, and I really struggled for a while to explain why. I know all about the murders of the DeFeo family, but how the case was portrayed and treated once the haunting was reported and the Warrens stepped in felt really weird. When they walked in the door, they were put on a pedestal immediately, painted to be almost superhuman. But why do people like Zach Baggins and the Warrens get put on a pedestal, while people who are trying to be more scientific are kind of elbowed aside as boring?
The trouble is nowadays, with social media and media as a whole, as you say, these people in the entertainment industry are put up on a pedestal, and the people who are plugging away at university, just minding their own business with their heads down, working to gather little bits of data over a very long period, they're not seen as being relevant or worthy of people's attention towards. And this was something I mentioned about 18 months ago to somebody who'd organised Paracon. And I said, why don't you invite an academic? Is it that you don't want them there because it doesn't fit in with your agenda? Or is it that you just never thought that that would happen? And it's been interesting that I got invited to one off the back of that. And they were like, oh, we had an impression about what you were going to be like, and you don't fit that impression at all. You don't fit that idea. I was thinking, well, what do people think I'm going to be like? It's my job to ask questions because I'm looking for the truth.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of skeptics who are so rude and dismissive without considering that these experiences can be really personal, especially if it involved a deceased family member. The severe skeptics are so brutal that I think a witness's walls come up first, and it's difficult to earn your way inside. And if we know anything, it's that few people, consumers of paranormal shows nor production executives, have any sort of patience for the time it takes to do that.
As you know, that when you're looking into something, genuine research takes a lot of time. It's like fishing, very rarely do you cast the line into the water and you pull out the greatest catch of all time within a few minutes. It takes time and dedication, a little bit of luck sometimes, but we like results very quickly. We like everything tied up in a nice neat bow within 30 minutes or an hour. And, the investigators, they're often seen as, I don't think they do it, certainly don't think they do it deliberately, but it always seems to be that the more investigations they've been on, the more reputable or credible an investigator they are. Rather than just doing one location repeatedly for months or years to gather a picture, to gather that data, I think they just put themselves in a knot, and it's tied the field up in knots, that we're not making any progression or meaningful progression, because we've got this, what my colleague Steve Parsons says, when it comes to the equipment, they throw everything at it in a scattergun approach, hoping they're going to get something, rather than just taking one little thing, concentrating on it for a good period of time. The construct of the paranormal reality TV shows very much follows what's come before it in terms of the police reality TV shows, where they've got some case to crack, they're following the officers. It's become very much that kind of thing, or Ice Truckers, or any of those. The format is still very much the same. We've got 24 hours to sort this out, And you mentioned horror earlier on, and you look at the way that the paranormal TV shows are actually presented and filmed. You go back to the Blair Witch Project, the way the use of the camera, or the glitchiness of the more modern shows with the iconic Gothic imagery shown on screen for a split second. And they all do that. They all play the music, that atmospheric drone in the background that reaches a crescendo at the right moment. So it pulls you in.
I think having an investigation that needs to be wrapped up within an hour has become even more required due to the pressure of economic hardship that a lot of people are going through right now. You have to entertain your viewers. You have to bring in that money. That desperation doesn't leave a lot of room for the time it takes to conduct a consistent investigation. It puts unrealistic expectations on the truth. Because sometimes the truth isn't exciting. Sometimes it isn't satisfying or convenient.
Very few paranormal investigators pick up books. As an academic, I love books. Reading was something that I was talking to my mum about it the other day. She said, even when you could pick up a book as an infant, you had the book the wrong way round, but you were still turning the pages because you watched your dad and I doing it. So reading, I always had a book in my hands, and it's something that people should do. But I know time is precious these days, and there are many other distractions. Academia is at fault as well, because there are genuinely, I have come across, albeit a small handful of investigators who do want to access the information and read. It's so difficult to get it because it's either behind university paywall, or if they do get it, you can't understand it anyway. I mean, you probably be the same. You've picked up some academic books and looked at it and thought, what on earth is this person talking about? I just do not understand it. Instead of writing in a way that is accessible to people, it's full of jargon, or it's so highly convoluted, it's hard to follow. So one of the things I really want is to make that information accessible and know where they can get it. There are a couple of books I always recommend to people. And when I've been doing this event that my fiancée Bridget in Savannah runs with her ghost tour, and I go along as a guest, I promote these couple of books. And one of the things I always say at the beginning is, I have this really good book here. In fact, I have two of them. They're available for sale at the end of the evening. Very rarely do people, even after that 3 hours they spend with us, go and buy the book.
There are stories about specific locations that everybody knows. They repeat the same stories on the tours, the same stories cycle around online. But if you pick up some books about that location, there's so much more you could find out that no one's talking about. I'll forever champion the Internet Archive and public libraries because they have so much more information than even what you'd expect. It makes investigating history so much more accessible.
And that's one of the other things that has become apparent when I've been doing the field work with groups and investigators, is that a lot of them don't know the history. There are some that do, and it's a pleasure when they refer to people like Harry Price and Borley Rectory, that they're aware of these. And by the way, some of those examples actually from American researchers who were more aware of what was going on in the UK and people in the UK. It's so nice to think that some people do take that time to learn the history of ghost hunting or paranormal research, but a lot of them don't. They then miss out on the fact that they don't know the mistakes that other people have made before them, and they're just repeating those mistakes.
Let's go back to the types of tools that people use to investigate. I personally struggle to be convinced by electronic evidence because I feel like there's a ton of variables while using those devices.
The problem is that it's all subjective. There is no objectivity to any of those devices because there are other explanations to what could be going on. So cat balls have notoriously cheap components. There are other explanations for why that could be lighting up. If you're going to claim that a ghost lit it up or a spirit lit it up, you're going to have to come up with a little bit more than that to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that that's what it was. So we spend a lot of time investing in things which are purely subjective, instead of stepping back and thinking, if I was to present an argument with evidence, how am I going to do it? What constitutes good evidence?
And I'm sure by now there are ghost hunting enthusiasts listening to this episode and are thinking, Jesus, well, what do you want us to do? If everything we're using to investigate is useless, what do you want us to do? But that's part of why ghost hunting is so hard. People have been trying to find the answer to this question for centuries. It's not necessarily because of any personal shortcomings of the investigator. It's that this whole field is unpredictable and difficult to pin down scientifically.
And the thing is, because they haven't got a very strict methodology, they've got an idea about what they want to do, but they're more concerned about making a YouTube video rather than actually recording any data, any evidence. They don't write things down. Ghost hunters or paranormal investigators, except on a few occasions, actually make really good contemporaneous notes about what's going on at the time. And the thing is, nowadays, it's so easy to do it because I know a lot of investigators like to do this in the dark, which to me is just pointless, unless the witness had an experience in the dark. But you've got a mobile phone nowadays, you've got a cell phone, where you can put all your notes. This is what I use all the time. It's just a shame that they don't put those methodologies into practice. We genuinely want people to investigate. We genuinely do.
Well, sure. The more people who do investigate, the more data we have to work with. That's great.
If you record things in the appropriate way, you're much more likely to be able to build up a much firmer picture about what is going on or what is not going on.
I also think that people put so much emphasis on capturing everything on video. I don't ghost hunt per se, but when I visit locations, I definitely feel that buzz of anxiety and pressure to record everything I can. And I've had to make a conscious effort to pay attention to what's going on outside of that little screen. You did say something that I thought we should elaborate on. Why do investigators choose to do so strictly in the dark? Most obviously, people say that that's because it's when ghosts are active. But if you think about it, most experiences where something was seen, well, the witness had to be able to see it. There are 24 hours in a day when we could be investigating the paranormal, so why do investigators only use such a small window?
It makes it more exciting, more thrilling. But we're not there for a spooky experience. We are there to understand what the witness experienced. One of the things I've heard investigators say is that they do it in the dark, so they have the cameras on because the camera could be picking up on things the human eye can't see. Yeah, but if the witness saw something in natural light, the experience is in our normal range of vision. So if you're going to think that the spirits, if that's indeed what they are, that is your confirmation bias. You're going in with a view that ghosts are spirits of the dead. And as I explain to people, we don't know what's going on. That could be one of the explanations, but there are several. Parallel universes, hallucinations, misperception. We have to be aware of all of those things so we don't put our biases onto the particular case. We take that step back and try and look at things in the cold light of day. And if the experience is at 3 a.m. in the morning, when the witness was in bed, the lights were off, fine, be in the dark. But if it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, sun is shining, that's where you need to be. And I speak to so many people who've experienced something during the day. And the experience of the witness as well is, what were they doing at the time? I speak to so many of them who definitely weren't looking for ghosts when they had their experience. In fact, they were probably doing something so mundane, day-to-day and ordinary, that ghosts were the furthest thing from their mind. I was talking to a woman in Savannah last year, and she told me about her daughter, who was on her way to college one morning, and her daughter saw a Confederate soldier leaning up against a tree, and this soldier vanished in front of her eyes. Now her daughter's walking along, mind is on going to college, going to class, she's got earbuds in, she's listening to some music. Ghosts are the furthest thing probably from her mind. But that's when she had the experience.
It's interesting how much of ghost hunting is going to a location and just demanding for a ghost to be there exactly when we want them to be there, but then we're somehow frustrated when the ghost doesn't show up to perform on command.
I mean, some of the sociologists who've done some previous work in the field, there's a very good one called Mark Eaton. He spent a lot of time with ghost hunting groups, and he looked at the sort of reliance on technology and the appearance of being scientific, because there is a air of credibility or scienciness if you have equipment. I'm a huge Ghostbusters fan. Aside from my personal experience at the age of 7, it was my mum being pestered by me to go to the cinema when I was 9 to go and see Ghostbusters. And their uniforms, they're responding to an emergency, they've built their own equipment, they're professional paranormal investigators and eliminators. That is what I think the modern paranormal groups have become by default. They're in uniform, they build their equipment, they respond to people's pleas for help. That look of equipment makes it look more legitimate. There are pieces of scientific kit which are much easier and more worthwhile to focus on than anything I think you can buy from one of these online shops. The most recent thing, I was talking to a very good friend and colleague, Steve Parsons, who's a physicist. He's looking at infrasound in haunted locations as part of his PhD work. He was on about the full spectrum cameras, because this is the thing that a lot of ghost hunters are spending their money, their hard-earned cash and savings on buying. There's no such thing as a full spectrum camera. And I had to break it to some poor gentleman a couple of weeks ago that there was no point buying it. To me, it's immoral, that people are selling this stuff when there was just simply no need. It's not going to reveal anything of interest other than tells you more about the people who are investigating than what they think they're getting on this camera. It's far more beneficial to go and buy a really, really good professional camera and know how to use it properly in the right conditions than go and buying any of this stuff that you think that you need.
I wonder if we just don't trust people anymore. We're not interviewing people. We're not investigating the circumstances from when they had this experience. We're ignoring the human element.
Very true. And I think one of the other problems is that you have people in positions of influence who, and I think back to examples in the UK where we had British politicians saying, you don't need to listen to the experts on this. Then you get a lot of people in the paranormal community who will say there are no experts in the paranormal. And I counter that with, that's like saying there's no experts in the law or the English. There are experts, but they usually have a specialism. For example, you have legitimate physicists who know about electromagnetic fields and infrasound and those kinds of things. Tap into their expertise. I don't go and use the equipment because I am not a physicist. I will not use that kind of stuff. My field, from my policing experience, was cognitive interviewing of witnesses, gathering evidence that way. That's one of the things that I am proficient on. That's what I focus on. So we should play to our strengths and not be frightened to admit that there are people who are genuinely very good at specific areas. The other problem we have is that there are people out there who are claiming legitimacy through titles. They are paying money to this online university and having PhD after their names, or doctor, and they're claiming to be parapsychologists. For me, I have a real issue with that because, personally, I have to write 100,000 words. I know I'm going to get asked lots and lots of questions, but I have had to work my socks off to get to that point, and I expect to be asked questions and challenged over what I found. These people are paying $1,300 and then using that title as a way of saying, oh, look at me, I am a parapsychologist, I have a PhD. And it's not worth the paper it's written on. But you can't convince them otherwise.
I think people want to be a part of this world and to experience the excitement of the paranormal, to have an experience. But I think we're ignoring how much work it is to actually become an expert in any field. It requires research, cycles of review, asking other experts about their opinions. It's a lot more than just owning a camera and asking questions in an empty building.
Yeah, and also not be frightened to admit that you don't understand something or you don't know. I know when we do the Ghostbusted events that I alluded to before, one of the things I say in the introduction is, if you ask me a question and I don't know the answer to it, I will tell you I don't know. And I will do my best to try and find somebody who is the appropriate person and come back to you with that information. It's being honest. It's being transparent. And it comes back, doesn't it, that one word, truth. That's what we're just trying to find out. We're trying to establish the truth.
So what would you suggest in terms of how we can bridge the gap between the ghost hunting community and the scientific investigation community? Because both of these groups get quite defensive of themselves when confronted with the other.
That is a really good question. And there is a new TV series that's come on in the UK. It's only 3 episodes, and it's called Uncanny. And it started life as a podcast, which has been incredibly successful. He's come forward with over the last few years. He's done a few different podcasts, but Uncanny has really sort of caught the public's attention. So the BBC said, right, we're going to do a TV version of it. So there's 3 one-hour episodes, and, it's a way of looking at a case, because each episode is a particular case. It's got merits, but there are some criticisms. And one of the things that he does, which is a spillover from the podcast, is, are you team believer or are you team skeptic? That division, you've got to pick a side. And it's as if being a skeptic is the wrong thing. Being a cynic is the wrong thing. But being a skeptic is having a mind which is open to the possibilities, but asking questions rather than accepting everything on blind faith.
Well, when you set up a situation where you're being forced to pick a side, you're automatically setting up a conflict between those two sides.
Yeah, and I just think I know it's a TV show and it's about, you have to perform, you have to make it engaging, but it just sets, I think, the wrong tone, because there is nothing wrong with being a skeptic. Because otherwise, if you just accept everything that's presented to you, goodness knows what that's going to lead us to. We think of the Salem witch trials, everybody believed what the girls were saying. Who was stepping back and being critical? That's why we do what we do, is we take that step back, we're critical. How do we do that? And I think there are a number of different ways in which we could do it. It's through engagement, and that's from both sides. They have to be willing to come together. And I approached lots and lots of paranormal groups, introducing myself. Would you be willing to spend some time with me? Obviously, there were a number which have. I'll be forever grateful for that. There were some that saw that, never responded, and they're wanting to go and say, well, why don't you want to? Because I can't make anybody. That might be down to the fact there's that distrust. They know you're from a university, they view you with suspicion. Some people who were initially curious or possibly even a little reluctant, after spending time with me, they acknowledged that, oh, you're a sound guy, you're okay. And I was like, well, thanks. I'm not here to entrap you. I want to find out how you work. It's about building that bridge, and more academics need to be able to do that. But likewise, more the amateur, and I'm not saying amateur is a bad thing. There was the amateur versus professionalism thing that's going on, which I'm particularly intrigued with through the PhD, is what makes a professional paranormal investigator. Getting that interaction, it's making information available. They know where to get it, and when they can get it, it's accessible. And that's in formats, and we can use media in different formats to make that information engaging and accessible, but also reliable and educational. I'm also willing to listen to anybody else who has ideas about how we can actually be better at this. I want people to genuinely come forward and say, well, how are we going to improve this? But I think engagement is, we haven't used the media effectively enough to be able to get our message across, because we are fighting against a very powerful media machine who are producing all these programs. If they want to do a TV show on how we investigate things, it's probably not going to be the most exciting TV in the world.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of professionals of scientific fields look down on ghost hunting. For example, whenever I reach out to a national park or a historian, I have to be really careful with how I word my inquiry, because a lot of people, as soon as they hear anything that's spooky or paranormal, they shut the conversation down immediately. Of course, the national parks are more than willing to tell spooky stories and legends in October when it can financially benefit them, but otherwise, they refuse to talk about it. It's really frustrating, and it makes it difficult to learn about the legitimate history or the cultural impact on certain areas.
There was one particular place in Savannah. This building has a fascinating history. It has some very interesting ghost stories associated with it. But when I emailed them, they shut us down straight away. And I approached it from the haunted legacy and what it means to that building, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. And it was shut down with, there's no haunted legacy. We used to do ghost tours about 15 years ago, but we stopped doing them. So I was like, well, hang on. Why did you stop doing them? There was obviously a reason, a thought process as to why you stopped. They didn't even respond to that email. I am not coming from a perspective or an angle where it's sensationalized. I'm doing it as an academic. I'm trying to find the truth. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can't make people tell you things.
Trying to approach the paranormal from a research perspective is so hard sometimes. You try to get a hold of academic studies or historic documents, and they shut you down. The university libraries put everything behind a paywall. Those stories, fiction or not, are important to the culture and history of the area, but a lot of people don't recognize that.
Ghost stories and this kind of thing are so ingrained in cultures all over the world. To record them and look at them I think is a hugely important and valid area of study. And I'm very lucky that the university that I'm at, there are many researchers and staff there who are as equally fascinated by it as I am, and they're genuinely thirsty for this area to grow. And I think that there are more and more academic institutions in the UK which are definitely starting to embrace looking at more of these areas. And hopefully that will be the same in the States.
And after this, we wrapped up the interview. This walk through applying a more scientific process to paranormal investigation was beyond fascinating. Hopefully you all found it interesting. And thanks again to Mr. Jones for giving me some of his time. You can find links to Dylan's work in the episode description. Share this episode with someone in your life who lives for ghost hunting. And have a very Merry Christmas.